All righty, good evening. Oh, no confidence monitor at the moment. Thank you very much. 6:30 in your songbook. Let's stand as we sing Sound the Battle Cry. It's good to see you this evening. Let's lift our voices together. Sound the battle cry, see the foe is not, raise the standard high for the Lord. Gird your armor on, stand firm everyone, rest your cause upon his holy word. Rouse them soldiers, rally round the banner, ready, steady, pass the word along. Onward, forward, shout aloud, Hosanna, Christ is captain of the mighty throng. Maybe you're a little tired tonight and we're having a hard time keeping that tempo up, but we're sounding like our soldiers are falling down on the road. Let's get that tempo back where we need it. Strong to meet the foe. Strong to meet the foe, marching as while our cause we know must prevail. Shield and banner bright, gleaming in the light, battling for the right where ne'er can fail. Rouse them, soldier, rally round the banner, ready, steady, pass the word along. Word forward, shout aloud, Hosanna, Christ is captain of the mighty throng. O thou God of all, hear us when we call, help us one and all by thy grace. When the battle's done and the victory's won, may we wear the crown before thy face. Rouse them, soldiers, rally round the banner, ready, steady, pass the word along. Onward, forward, shout aloud, Hosanna, Christ is captain of mighty throng. Well, welcome to Wednesday night prayer meeting and special Bible study. And please be praying, if you would, for the Greer family. Jeff Greer was promoted to glory yesterday afternoon after his battle with cancer. Those services will be Friday, 4 o'clock visitation, 5 o'clock funeral over in the Shumpert. So if you can make it out to that, that would be a blessing, I know, to the family. And then also keep praying for Pastor as he's recovering. He's, it's been a week, and I remember that days 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 were some pretty trying times. So pray for him, because the mind is willing, but the body is not at this point. So pray for him as he's recovering from there, and pray for Miss Day, of course, as well, as the caregiver there. So pray for her also. Let's go to the Lord now in prayer. Father, we thank you for the opportunity we have to come tonight. Lord, I pray be with Pastor Gavin as he opens the word. We look forward to what you've put on his heart for us. Lord, I pray be with the Greer family. And Lord, I thank you that Jeff knew you and he's now with you, and his faith is
start. I'm going Anybody think they know yet? All right, we'll move on. Hold everything in your hands lightly, otherwise it hurts when God pries your fingers open. Anybody know? Anybody think they know yet? All right, next up, there is no pit so deep that God's love is not deeper still. We have a couple hands at this point. We'll keep reading, though. Let's see. Any concern too small to be turned into a prayer is too small to be made into a burden. I like that one. Never be afraid to trust an unknown future to a known God. This person said it, and then other people have said it too, so that one could be confusing. If you look at the world, you'll be distressed. If you look within, you'll be depressed. If you look at God, you'll be at rest. All right, one more. This is maybe one of the more well-known quotations. Worrying is carrying tomorrow's load with today's strength, carrying 2 days at once. It is moving into tomorrow ahead of time. Worrying doesn't empty tomorrow of its sorrow, it empties today of its strength. All right, if you think you know who it is, raise your hand. Oh, we had hands, and now the hands have disappeared. Okay, we have 3. Mr. Lee. Not D.L. Moody. That's a good one, and I can see why you would think that. Yes. It is not Spurgeon. We have a couple teenagers up there. Corrie ten Boom. Did I tell you? No, she really got it right. It's Corrie ten Boom. All right, so how many of you know who Corrie ten Boom is? Most of you. So tonight, I really just want to take a look at her life. I enjoy learning through people's lives. Even when I'm in the Bible, one of my favorite things is a character sketch. Just looking at the biography of a believer who's gone before me, who's gone through things that I definitely don't want to go through. And Corrie ten Boom would certainly fall into that category. So I really just want to look through her life quickly. We don't have a lot of time. I think last time I presented this, it was in a 2-part series. So I'm going to speak quickly. You listen quickly. If you do have questions, please raise your hand. If I don't know the answer, I'll tell you that. But if I do, I will tell you what the answer is. All right. So Corrie ten Boom, she was born in 1892 in the Netherlands. Does anybody know where the Netherlands is? Most of you probably do. It's not one of those 3 Baltic states, which honestly for a long time I thought it was. The Netherlands is in mainland Europe, and it's right beside Germany, okay? So just as you're thinking through all of this, remember it's right beside Germany, all right? Born in 1892 in Haarlem, she had 3 siblings. She was the youngest. If you can see on that picture, she's the baby of that group. She had 2 sisters and a brother. She lived with her mom and dad, of course. Her dad was called the Grand Old Man of Haarlem. Now, he owned a watch shop. And so she wasn't affluent at all, but she was comfortable. So she was born into a comfortable family. They were members of the Dutch Reformed faith, so not exactly Baptist, but not too far off, okay? So Reformed theology. But as I was listening to one commentator several years ago, the healthy kind of Reformed theology is how he put it. So they were very evangelistic, and part of the Dutch Reformed faith is a reverence for the Jewish people. And so you need to remember that too as we're moving on, okay? So she had 3 siblings. She was born to a not affluent family, but a comfortable family. And because of their faith, they were very charitable. They tried to take care of those around them. All right, she is often referred to as the watchmaker's daughter. And that is because her dad, they lived in a large home in Haarlem in the Netherlands, and her dad owned a watch shop. And back then, watches were a big deal, right? We can go to Walmart now and buy one for $5, but it was intricate design to make a watch that could keep time and that was reliable. And so that's what her dad did in Haarlem. And she, in 1921, her mother passed away. And so it was just her and her father and her other sister, Betsy, in the home. And she had to help. She had to try to help run the family business. So she actually went away to Switzerland for a little while and became the first licensed watchmaker, female licensed watchmaker in the Netherlands. So that's what Corrie ten Boom did as her job. She helped her dad run the watch shop. She became, one thing I didn't realize about Corrie ten Boom, all the things we know about Corrie ten Boom, most of them happened to her when she was in her 50s. And so she lived a whole life before most of the things that we know about her. So she was in her 20s, early 30s, and she was in a very serious relationship with a man, and his mother was not pleased with her social status. Remember I said they were just comfortable but not affluent, and so his mother required that they break up. And she had a real testing of her faith at that time, but the Lord really brought her through that, and she decided right then and there, Lord, my life is yours, and she dedicated her life to the Lord. And kind of at that moment knew she would live her life single. And so what happened is she decided that she was going to dedicate her life to helping people, specifically those who were mentally impaired. And so she started a Bible study with her sister, and she actually wrote a book way before she wrote anything that we all are very common with, and it's Common Sense Not Needed. And it was kind of a handbook to how to work with those with mental disability and those who may have physical limitations. And so she did that in Harlem for a decade. And so some of the things we don't often hear about her. As I said, they lived in a home, and it's often referred to now as the Baye house, which Baye really just means house, large house. But if you ever study her life, you'll hear often reference to the Baye. So that just means their house. It was you can see on this picture the storefront. That was their original home when it was just their family. But two of her aunts moved in when she was a young girl. And so her dad bought another house that was right behind their home. But if you see how this house is situated, the Baye, it's facing the street, and there was an alley that ran on the side. Okay, well, there was another home right behind this house, but it faced this way, the side alley, and there was an alley in between the two homes. Okay, well, her dad finished that off. And this is very important later on when we talk about what the ten Boom family went through. So they have this gigantic house now, but the original home was 2 floors, and then the home that they bought was 3 floors, but they were the same height house. Okay, so we have 2 stories and 3 stories, but the same height. So when they connected them, nothing made sense. There was an alley that they closed in, it just had a spiral staircase, and then you had three stories and 2 stories. So it was just a very strange home. But in God's providence, that's kind of how it ended up needing to be designed as we talk through some more of the house. So you just need to know that about the house. It was strange. And it still stands today, if you're ever over there. Last time, when I was at my former church and I presented this, someone came up to me right after and said, I've been there. I was able to see, you can still see the hiding place. It still stands. So anyways, as we move forward, Hitler brings war to the Netherlands, so we're talking World War II. The Netherlands thought that they would be just fine in World War II. Anybody know what year did World War II start? What did you say? 39. The U.S. went in 41, but in 39, 38, there were some rumblings. The late 30s, the U.S. went in 41, but in 1940, Hitler invaded the Netherlands, and the Netherlands was taken off guard. Even though they're a border state, they're right beside Germany. In World War I, they had been left alone. They announced that they were neutral, and Germany never messed with the Netherlands. And so when Hitler invaded the Netherlands, they were very taken off guard. Okay, so they did not expect this to happen, and very quickly after Hitler took over the Netherlands, they noticed a lot of persecution, but specifically with what group of people? The Jews. Now, another thing I have to tell you and be honest, when I was a kid studying this, I thought Corrie ten Boom was a Jew because she was thrown into a concentration camp. Hope I didn't just ruin the story for you, but that's where we're going. I thought she was a Jew, but remember, she's not. They're of the Dutch Reformed faith, but they helped the Jews, and that's what we're going to talk about for a little bit. So the Nazis were very unkind to everybody. They're not really known for being kind, okay? But they were especially unkind to the Jews, and over the span of World War II, just from the Netherlands alone, from Harlem specifically, in the surrounding area, Netherlands is not very large, over 100,000 Jews were taken just from the Netherlands in that time. So then we have the hiding place, and shortly after Hitler invaded the Netherlands, the ten Boom family saw man, they're being especially cruel to the Jews. And so they said, we have to do something. And actually, there's a really cool story. The first time Father Ten Boom, and you have to understand, he's in his 80s. He's in his very early 80s at this point. He's called the Grand Old Man of Harlem. But there was a pastor that he was familiar with who had been brought a Jewish baby, but that pastor was not willing to take any risk, and so he would not take that baby. And Grandpa Ten Boom took the baby, and that's how they started aiding Jewish people. And so they quickly became the safe house in Harlem for Jewish people. It's a really cool story, and we don't have time to look into it now, but if you have time, I encourage you to study it further. People would call and say, I have a watch that needs repair. That was the code word in Dutch. They would say, I have a watch that needs repair, and that was the code word to let you know, I have a Jew that really needs safe harbor. And so Jews would come there. There was a little triangle that would sit in the storefront, because remember, it's still a watch shop, and if they saw the red side of the triangle, it meant it's safe. You can bring the Jews here now. If not, it would be the back side, and that meant stay away. Don't come in here now. There's the police. One thing that's important to note about the Bayet, the home, is it's on the same block, and in the Netherlands, a block is small, not like New York City. It's on the same block as the police station. Okay, so the safe house is next door to the police station. So they had to have some way to let people know if it was safe or not. So you have the hiding place. You can see that is still there, as I said. Obviously, that hole in the wall was not there at the time. But you can see that there is a bookshelf on the side of the picture, the very bottom. I realized the first time that I started studying this, I would have been out of luck, because you have to crawl on that bottom shelf of the bookshelf to get into the hiding place. So I would have just gone on to meet my maker early, because I wasn't going to fit in that bottom shelf. But there was a weight system, and it would lift the wall from behind that bookshelf, and you crawled underneath the bookshelf, that bottom section of the bookshelf. And sometimes for up to 2 days, there would be up to 6 adults in that little space behind the wall. There was just air ventilation, but that's where they were trying to hide Jews. Corey's room, this is where the hiding place was. If you remember that illustration of the house, you come in through the watchmaker shop. It's the third floor on the top, the third floor in the back of the home. So as far away from the front door as you could get. And they created a system. Remember, 1940 is when they invaded the Netherlands, and the Ten Booms did this for 4 years. It's estimated they saved up to 800 Jews during that time. But there was a buzzer that they would press, and it meant everybody needs to scatter and get into the safe house. Because all that was expected to live there, the only ones that on paper lived there were Corey, her sister, her oldest sister, Betsy, and then their father. But they had dozens and dozens of people in the home at all times, typically. There's another really cool story. They were rationing goods in the Netherlands at the time. And so Corey Ten Boom, they were desperate. They had a ton of people at the home secretly. And so she went next door to the police station, because that's where you got your ration cards. And she said, I didn't know anything else to do, so I went to the police station, and I said, you know what? We're all going to die if we don't eat, and so we're going to have to eat. And she said, I need 100 ration cards, to the police officer. And thankfully, the police officer was a believer, unbeknownst to her, and gave her 100 ration cards. But he answered to a Nazi superior, and every ration card had to be answered for, so he beat himself and staged a robbery. And so that's how they got their ration cards for that week. And there are just tons of stories of God's providence through their lives. And as I've studied Corey Ten Boom's life, one thing I have been really convicted of is my lack of trust. I mean, there are times where I don't trust the Lord for just little bitty things that are of nothing to him at all. And then I look at Corey Ten Boom's life and I think, man, the difference between the amount of faith I carry on a day-to-day basis and the amount of faith that she and her family had is unbelievable. It's convicting. It's really sad, but it's encouraging that I just need to continue on and pray and ask the Lord to increase my faith. Well, they did this until 1944, and then a man showed up at their door and said, I heard you help Jews. My wife's a Jew, and the police are looking for her. Could you please help her? And, of course, they said, absolutely, yeah, bring her on. Well, he was an informant. He was a traitor for the Nazis, and he went and reported them to the Nazis. And they came and busted through the door, and they had a lot of Jews at the home at the time. But thankfully, Corrie was up. She had the flu, and so, well, maybe it was January or February. She had the flu, and she was way up in her room. And so Betsy, her oldest sister, came and answered the door, and she was able to hit one of those buzzers that went off in the back of the house. And so they tried to get all the Jews hidden away. But they came through, beat her father and her sister. And you remember her sister is in her early 60s at the time. Corrie ten Boom's in her late 50s, and her father was 83 at this time. And so beat them and arrest them all and take them to prison. And so they arrive in prison there in Harlem, and 10 days after this is said to be the first time that Corrie and Betsy had been separated, ever. They were two spinsters, and one in their early 60s, one late 50s. So they separated her in solitary confinement for 3 months. But soon after she moved in and got a little bit better, she got a letter from someone out in Harlem that letting her know that 10 days after they had been taken to prison, her father had passed away. So 83 years old, was imprisoned. But she realized that the stamp on the envelope was strange, and she said, that is a weird way to put a stamp on. And so she took the stamp off, and on the back in Dutch was written, "All the watches are safe." So even though there was a raid into their home, every Jew who had been hidden there had gotten away to safety because of the hiding place. So she was thankful for that. So they were there for a bit, and then they get moved to a place that I'm not going to try to pronounce. It's called, maybe I will try, Herzogenbusch, but I'm probably getting that wrong. It's a concentration camp in the Netherlands. Pastor Dave knows how to say it, so talk to him after for a lesson. It goes by short Camp Voet, which I can say that. It's in the Netherlands. It wasn't severe. It wasn't a terrible concentration camp. Definitely wasn't great. They were given jobs there. Betsy she sewed prison uniforms, and Corrie ten Boom was given the job because she had some engineering ability. She was given the job working on radios for German flyers. And in one of her books, she talks about how she intentionally didn't do a good job. She, several times, she ruined the whole batch and then sent them out as if they were good. So she tried to contribute to the war, but they were there for a bit, and that was in the Netherlands, and there where they lived. Then they were sent, and you probably all have heard of Ravensbrück or Ravensbrück. It was a rather notorious concentration camp. And they were sent there. You did not want to be sent there. This is the place. It was a female-only concentration camp. It's also where the female Nazi leaders were sent to train. And they were known to be especially cruel, and because they were usually trying to impress their superiors and move up in the ranks. And so you didn't want to go there. That's kind of where you went to die, if that's where you were shipped off to as a concentration camp. But they were sent there. And they were sent into their barracks. Their barracks were built for approximately 400 people, and they had 1,400 women in those barracks, most of them in their 50s and 60s. And so Corrie ten Boom arrived there, and she talked about how just the despair all over the place. When she had been originally taken to the police station, though, a nurse, you remember I told you she was in solitary confinement for 3 months. One of the nurses there was a believer and gave her a small New Testament. And so she had been able to keep that through the first concentration camp, and now she was here, and she still had that New Testament. And she was put into this concentration camp. She was put into the barracks with over 3 times the amount of people who they said there were 3 to 4 people per straw mattress. And it was just absolutely nasty. Flea and lice infested. She said within a day, everything you wore, your hair, you were just covered in fleas and lice. And it was a very low time, as you can imagine. But another one of her quotations, which I didn't put on here, because if you knew the story, I thought it might be a little too obvious, is, "I thank God for the lice." And the reason being, the the guards would not come into the barracks. Specifically this barrack, I think it was barrack number 28. And so twice a day they had a Bible study in that barrack. And she led tons of women to the Lord, she and her sister, while they were in Ravensbrück. We move on, and I haven't talked too much about Betsy, but she was the oldest sister of the four, easily Corey's best friend. I think probably a bond between sisters we all know is very tight, but this is extremely close. They, like I said, lived 60 years together. And so Betsy became very ill while she was in Ravensbrück. Often ladies would be called. You weren't called by your name, you were called by your number. And so prisoner numbers would be read, and you would be told you were going to take a shower. And for the first little bit that ladies were there, they got very excited because they realized, oh, good, it's time to shower, try to get some of the fleas and lice off. But they soon realized these women don't come back. And so most of the time they were sent to the crematorium. And Betsy was one of the older women in the barracks, and so they expected that would be her end. But she died naturally in Ravensbrück in December of 1944. And that, again, was very hard for Corrie ten Boom, as you can imagine. Just a few months later, 2 weeks actually, after that though, Corrie ten Boom's number was called, her prisoner number. And so she thought, oh, well, I guess I'm next. But she was called to the front office, and she was given a pair of shoes that were too small, and she was given a bunch of clothes, and she was sent on her way. She was released. She found out years later when she returned it was a clerical error, because her whole group, like within a day or two after that, were all sent to the crematorium. And so she was released. And so this is probably the story most of you know. Corrie ten Boom became very active when she left. She's now in her early 60s. Her father died in prison. Her oldest sister died in prison. Her brother was also taken to a different concentration camp. He died in that concentration camp. She had several nephews who passed away in a concentration camp. She had one surviving sister who died shortly thereafter from an illness that she contracted in the concentration camp. So she's alone. She's been surrounded by family her whole life. Now she finds herself alone. So she gets out and she goes and starts another home. And you know who this home's for? This is after the war, and she's caring for refugees, and she's also caring for those Nazi sympathizers who have been outcast now from the Netherlands, because of course the Netherlands had their freedom again, and the Nazi sympathizers were not cared for. And so she spent several years doing that. And then what most of you know about her probably is then she started traveling the world telling her story. And if you have never listened to I won't call it a sermon because we're independent Baptists, but if you've never listened to a talk, whatever we want to call it, by Corrie ten Boom, you should go home and do it tonight. It is absolutely convicting that a woman could go through all this and still love the Lord as much as she does. And her talk of forgiveness, she met several years later, she was traveling, and she met the man who had beat Betsy in Ravensbrück almost to death. And he came up and shook her hand and asked for her forgiveness. And she talks about the internal struggle within 5 seconds. But the power of forgiveness in a believer's life. And so that's really what she dedicated her life to. She did that for many years. In the 1970s, she came over to the United States and she started traveling, and she became friends with Ruth Graham, Billy Graham's wife, and they made a movie. Have any of you ever seen the movie, The Hiding Place? Also, if you've never seen that, highly recommend it. So that's really kind of the end of her story, except for one thing I didn't know. In 1978, she had a massive stroke. And for 5 years, she lived without the ability to communicate. She could walk, she could move, she just could not speak, she couldn't spell, she couldn't read. She was just very mentally handicapped at that point. But there's another book written called The 5 Silent Years of Corrie ten Boom by her personal aide who had lived with her for 5 years before that. I also encourage you to read that, to just see how a believer has a different outlook. And I know Pastor David, all he does, working with believers who are headed to glory, it's a totally different situation than those who don't know the Lord. And I just wanted to talk to you briefly about Corrie ten Boom today, just for a couple of reasons. Number one, I find it very helpful to remember that my present circumstances are nothing compared to what other believers have gone through. One thing that's been really helpful since I moved here is I do prayer time each Wednesday night. And you all don't get it, and we don't have the time to share it here, but Sarah Gilbert sends me every week the persecuted church of the week. And I get to read what people are going through. I think tonight is Somalia, if I'm not mistaken. And what we go through, sometimes we talk about our trials and our tribulations. And it's not I know we all have burdens. But if Corrie ten Boom could do it, I can be faithful to the Lord. Sometimes I have a cough. And sometimes I'm worried about a bill, but Corrie ten Boom lost literally every family member she had in the Holocaust and then dedicated her life 40 years from the time she got out up until her 90s. She died on her 91st birthday. So into her late 80s, she was traveling telling the people about how good God is. And I am so convicted every time I read that. I doubt God's goodness with a little bitty roadblock, and she had so many obstacles she came over. And so I hope that's encouraged you. If anybody have any questions about Corrie ten Boom at all, anywhere, something you don't know or something you need more clarification on? Anybody never heard of her before tonight? We have a couple. Okay. I really encourage you to go read her book, The Hiding Place, or watch the movie if you're not a reader. But it's very encouraging. And then, like I said, try to look up. She has a poem that she does. It's called The Tapestry, talking about how great the tapestry looks on the back, on the front, but the back side's not such a pretty story. That's very encouraging as well. All right, we will. These are other books you can go read if you need any more information about her. We'll go into our prayer time at this point. Everybody have a prayer sheet? Anybody need one? All right, if you'll go ahead and open to